at GDOT, as well as in the governor's leadership there, making sure we do the most that we can with the resources that we have projected already, and expanding public-private partnerships and leveraging technology so we can best utilize our limited state resources. Strengthening rural Georgia is key also for us. As you may know, we've just recently set up a new rural transportation office and planning, but it also includes a new rural lump sum program that was just approved by the General Assembly. We'll be rolling out that rural development program that allows us to help expand rural broadband for economic growth, using some of our dollars where there's a nexus with transportation. Deploying rural strike teams, that's sort of a new term to state government. These are economic development professionals that are out in statewide cultivating site locations and communities to be ready for that investment by private sector. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And of course, putting Georgians first, as you know, goes without saying. That's our #1 goal here at GDOT. The statewide strategic transportation plan, or as you'll hear us talk about it, the SSTP, throughout this presentation, really was the very first business case for investment. The very first one that came out was about 2010. It's been updated since then, and you can find on our website at GDOT Planning, or you just type in GDOT SSTP to the in a web browser, and you'll find the most recent version, which was approved by the governor and the board earlier this year. This is really all about advising our transportation investments so that they do the most to improve economic outcomes. So this SSTP describes how GDOT plans to invest an average of $2.38 billion a year in our transportation network. That is the ones that the pieces of the network that are owned and managed by GDOT through the year 2050. And it shows the outcomes that are possible with this level of investment, including state of good repair at 88 to 90% for our bridges and pavement condition, as well as reducing our cost of congestion by 10% with just better operational policies and investments in technology, as well as nearly $1 billion we project on average of capacity improvements to really enable more free flow in the right targeted locations throughout the state. So I encourage you to please take a look at the SSTP. What you'll see there is, in order to get to those outcomes, we have established 3 tracks of work: foundational, catalytic, and innovation investment. Oh, Tyler, go back up one for me. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So there's 3 tracks of work in the invest part of the strategy: investing in our foundational, catalytic, and innovation strategies for 3 portfolios, including freight and logistics mobility across the state of Georgia. So we endeavor to ensure that this $2.38 billion is effective for 3 portfolios, including freight and logistics, but we're also indicating not just where we're putting dollars towards tangible assets, but how we're going to advance our planning. And advancing our planning in freight and logistics is what I want to talk with you about next on the next slide. This is sort of a laundry list of the activities that we have underway at GDOT for freight and logistics, what we're committing to doing. Top of the list, of course, is our statewide freight and logistics infrastructure plan that we're talking about here today. There are other activities underway at the department, including the state grade crossing safety action plan, or state action plan, required by the Federal Rail Administration, that's due next year. We're also looking to identify improvements of intermodal connectivity. As you may know, the General Assembly has passed legislation this year that expands GDOT's P3 capabilities that include intermodal and rail. That is currently under legal review at the governor's office. That is House Bill 577. So that could play a part of what our infrastructure plan looks like. We're also evaluating options to improve freight movement around Port of Savannah and Brunswick, of course, and exploring options for discretionary funding. In the partnerships frame, truck parking is going to continue to be a challenge, I think, nationwide. And we'd like to decipher here in Georgia how GDOT can partner with other entities, public or private, to expand those options. Rural strike teams, as I mentioned, for freight and logistics projects. We're going to give you some statistics later about why that economic development frame is so important for the state in a transportation investment angle. We're working very closely with Atlanta Regional Commission and the other MPOs on regional freight mobility planning, thinking about broadband connectivity. I'm going to explore some planning opportunities there for freight facilities and the digitization of supporting the digitization of the supply chain and freight technologies, and of course, looking for supply chain resilience in all the work that we do, and continue to expand industry partnership. And then really lastly, what this is all about is understanding the performance of our network from a freight fluidity standpoint to keep us competitive, and our economic impact return on investment is a key piece of the analysis to know that. So in a nutshell, the plan on a page, this is the work that we're doing at GDOT Planning. I want to talk for just a moment now about rural transportation opportunities. Next slide for me there, Tyler. Yeah, now these are just very, very, very tip of the iceberg, but line of sight into how important rural transportation networks are for our state, for our economy. Again, of course, looking to enact Governor Kemp's strategic goals for rural Georgia. But where we had new private investment in the essentially the third quarter of last year, even in the midst of a pandemic, 83% of that new investment was outside of Metro Atlanta. And I'll show you some of those locations here in just a moment. But we also know that our infrastructure needs improvement in rural areas where 82% of our bridges are structurally deficient in rural areas, and where we have public road miles that are locally owned. 82% of those, 82% of Georgia's roads are locally owned, where can be difficult for rural communities to improve their own infrastructure with the financial picture in mind. The state really has a role to make sure that connectivity through rural roads, rural networks is maintained. A few other freight by the numbers to share with you that we have in mind on the next slide are total truck volume. These are just some data points that we know and data points that we're looking at. Obviously, there is far more data that we are looking to cultivate into actionable insights. But these are just a few of them that we know as of now that we have top of mind. Total truck volume on our state route system is nearly 25 million each day, and 18.3 million of that is on our state freight network. 73% of the trucks on our state route are on our state freight network. And we'll show you that map in just a moment, which can also be found at GDOT Freight website. Here we're going to talk about the GRAD sites, the Georgia Ready for Accelerated Development. 63 of those, and that's nearly all of them, are within, I should say, a 5-mile radius of the state freight network. That's really a critical piece for us to consider here in the movement of freight inbound and outbound for all sorts of logistics enabled industries. Again, we'll talk about that more later, but the more information about the GRAD sites, Georgia Ready for Accelerated Development, can be found on Georgia Department of Economic Development's website. We're currently doing a cursory analysis, which yielded this statistic right here, but it's going to be, we think, an important piece of our freight plan going forward. About 55% of our structurally deficient bridges are on rural local roads. We know that has the potential to impede efficient freight flows, especially for trucks that are fully loaded. We have over 315 million tons in 2017 of freight that originated and stayed in Georgia, valued at about nearly $300 billion. And then this last part is important too. Georgia's active rail mileage. This number has not changed over the years, 4,765 miles. But we have found that there's nearly 5,000 public rail crossings, road crossings at Georgia's railroads. 5,000, more than 5,000. That's more than one a mile on average. These are a lot of opportunities for unsafe conditions, whether it be driver behavior. We know that is difficult to influence, I should say, but infrastructure can play a role in helping keep those intersections from being collisions and fatalities. A lot of that work is going on right now with the state action plan. We will look to incorporate the work that's going on in intermodal on that state action plan into this work. Next slide, just another little status of the way that we are seeing the need for freight improvement statewide. This is from the Site Selection magazine's March issue. They listed the United States top micropolitan areas for site selection over the past year in 2020. Now, micropolitan they define as population between 10,000 and 49,000. Georgia is ranked third, as in we have the third most micropolitans that were chosen for site selection last year. 16 sites that include Jefferson. City of Jefferson is number 2. Calhoun, Bainbridge, Dublin, Fitzgerald, LaGrange, Americus, Thomasville, and Waycross. There is a lot of economic activity that requires inbound and outbound freight throughout the state, and this is just one indication of that. Next slide, just as a reflection upon another current state of play, facts on the ground, that we have an award-winning freight and logistics action plan that was first adopted in 2012, updated in 2017, approved by Federal Highways in 2018. So as you know, as you likely know, the Federal Highways Administration requires that each state update their freight plan every 5 years. So our next plan is due January of 2023. So we have a tradition of excellence here in our freight planning. This was one of the first very targeted state freight plans in the country, and since, of course, every state now has to have one, but we are interested in upping the game one more time. In that next slide, Tyler, in that plan, we laid out a vision and a mission statement for our network, and I'm going to take just a pause here for you to read that. Keywords really in the vision are global gateway of choice. That is, our customers want, our carriers and our shippers continue to want to be here because of reduced time to market, superior supply chain efficiency, and reliability. Now, how we achieve and have been achieving that mission statement is declared here, but there's 4 C words that we really like to focus on: capacity, capability, and connectivity to keep Georgia competitive. These are things that will continue to guide our work in this upcoming new freight plan. Just a couple more lay of the land slides, which is the next one, indicates the importance of the connection between Metro Atlanta and Savannah. This is thanks to the Atlanta Regional Commission, who we will be doing some more robust partnerships with during this freight plan. The statistics here were presented in 2019, so they're a little bit aged, and I'm sure these numbers have grown. But what you can see is more than 100,000 trucks every year going back and forth that are loaded, but double that means there's a lot of empties running around. Nearly 1,000 trucks a day, and at that time, 3 intermodal trains per day. We know with the growth at the Port of Savannah, including the Mason Mega Rail Yard that is beginning to open up, we're going to probably see more than 3 intermodal trains per day, and we'll continue to see that growth in the coming years. That does remind me, I want to make a statement around the grade crossings as well. Blocked crossings have been a significant challenge, I think, nationwide as the rail industry changes its business model and its operating model. But we are seeing blocked crossing issues that we want to address in this plan as well. And then lastly, all of that, as I was talking about the state freight network, the map that's on the next slide, like I said, can be found on our GDOT Freight website. This is what carries, as mentioned, on the freight network, the total state network, trucks use this network about 75% of the time, about 3/4 of the time. We feel like this is a useful grid of connectivity between various origin destination sites, but we're interested in taking another look at this, as in where we might want to prioritize additional investments on this network, and are there other pieces of the linkages here to improve our capacity and connectivity that we might want to consider bringing onto the state freight network. So now moving on to trends, opportunities, and challenges, sort of the complication part of this. What's new that we have to, that we're looking at, that we have to respond to or want to respond to, and use tools and plans that are available to us. The first one is the National Freight Strategic Plan, published by Federal Highways and US DOT, really, about 6 months ago. There's a vision that is about producers and shippers and consumers. Again, the customer focus here. And the point of this plan is multifaceted, but we pulled out for our sake here as we're developing our state freight plan, that it is intended to guide and inform state freight plans through improved cross-sector multimodal collaboration, enhancing intermodal connectivity and first and last mile connections. Multi-state investment is of interest as well in the national frame, as we know that is important to us as well. And identifying bottlenecks and strategies to mitigate congestion, improve travel time reliability. And I do, at this point, want to make a particular note of thanks to the General Assembly's Freight and Logistics Commission, which just concluded its first 2 years of work. On the General Assembly's website, you can find that final report. It lays out a list of recommendations and goals. We are contemplating those and looking at ways we can potentially address and achieve some of the goals that are there. That includes bottlenecks, addressing interstate and traffic congestion bottlenecks that impede freight flow. Intermodal connectivity is also important to the General Assembly's Freight Commission, as seen in the report there, as is truck parking. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Next slide, though, the trends that are there, and pardon the lack of crisp graphics here, but really this is just a copy paste from that National Freight Strategic Plan. And I encourage you all to take a look there and understand how we in Georgia can apply the policies and the priorities that are set forth in the national plan and how we fit into that national network. But the trends and opportunities that are delineated there include growing population and economy, diversifying global supply chains, changing urban and rural dynamics, increase of e-commerce, and advancing technology. We're going to talk about many of these right now. The next slide, these are projections of our population growth here in Georgia, that in the next 20 years, we will leapfrog from 8th to 5th largest state with 12.8 million population here in the state. Again, just projections, but we do have a trend of doing that historically, so it is likely to be the case. With increased population, of course, comes increased demand for freight. Next slide talks about the rural-urban dynamics that's in the National Freight Strategic Plan. This is a graphic selected from that plan. Each of those dots means 2,000 jobs and jobs by county, as you can see there in the little zoom-in box to Georgia. All of these and additional maps we'll show you next are simply an indication to us that we need to pay attention to our network statewide, the efficiency of flow between metro areas and from those production sites to the consumer where they live in retail distribution and retail shops. Next slide talks about how that looks in Georgia, this rural-urban interdependency in supply chains, automotive manufacturing, and warehousing and distribution. None of this is really a surprise, as you know, it's not as though we didn't know that there's activity that's occurring in production and distribution throughout the state. But the visual, I think, is helpful, especially the warehousing and distribution on the right, where those circles are in other parts of the state are just as big as the circles in Metro Atlanta and Savannah. This is courtesy of Georgia Power and the Community and Economic Development, which do amazing work and have incredible amount of data and analytics that we at the Department of Economic Development rely on tremendously. So Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you from here for the next few slides.
Sure, thank you. And you know, the information from the previous slides kind of lead to let you know what we're kind of highlighting here, which is about Georgia's economic development results, and it clearly shows from the last fiscal year, you know, 350 companies expanding or locating in the state with 7.4 billion in investment, and of that, almost 93% of that investment is logistics-enabled businesses. So these are investments in businesses that either rely on logistics for their inputs, or they rely on logistics for getting their goods to customers, you know, from whether it's a manufacturing facility or rely on them for distribution as well. You know, key industries for the state, again, manufacturing, automotive, and logistics, and then agribusiness and food processing, which is another key part for Georgia. So the key takeaway here to highlight is that, you know, we rely on logistics and the ability to move freight efficiently and effectively. Our companies that are here and that want to be here rely on that at a large scale, and so we need to make sure that we're being responsive with these key industries for their needs as we're being responsive. So and on the next slide, you can see as it relates to agriculture and food production. You can see again, it's again a continuing trend of, as Janine pointed out, the larger dots in the rural areas that are providing, you know, production and serving those markets that may be in more urban areas. So the connection between the entire state and knowing with agriculture, especially the seasonal needs and the seasonal trends that may relate to the products as the growers, and then they move to market, and being able to understand those trends and how those move through as well. So those are kind of key issues there. And Janine, with e-commerce, I don't know if you want to cover, talk about that a little bit as well from the next slide.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. As I think we've all experienced in our own personal lives, and have seen the growth in e-commerce over time really accelerate since the COVID pandemic descended upon us. These are just some statistics, line of sight into sporting, leisure goods, home improvement, e-commerce, even that. Not sure how many cans of paint were delivered, but I certainly know that there are all kinds of other things that are sold and needed in home improvement and DIY that catapulted that industry in e-commerce, as well as apparel and, of course, general mass merchandise, including grocery. This is just one view of the growth, and this was actually captured in the summer of last year. It's grown even since then. And what that means for our network statewide, we're seeing, of course, more distribution centers emerge on the fringes of our metro areas. We're also seeing at the local view, the last mile. In places like Georgia, that last mile is more like 6, 7, 8 miles. But those, as those retail goods were previously carried by the consumer from the retail shop to the home, those are increasingly being carried by trucks, small trucks, of course. But nonetheless, freight impacts on our network should be viewed at both the state and the metro area level. One of the major drivers of our ability to have e-commerce flow here is the Port of Savannah, and Matt, I'll turn it back to you for that.
So on the next slide, I think that it's pretty well known of just how beneficial our ports are and how great an asset those are to the state. It is exciting to see that, as of 2020, we were ranked the top exporting state for the first time. So that's a significant indicator of the growth of manufacturing, of the growth of what Georgia is doing in production that relies on the port and relies on access to and from the port in order to make sure that they're able to be competitive, able to grow, and continue to be strong. Over the last year, obviously with COVID, a little bit of a tick in the massive growth that the ports have seen. It's pretty much just a blip on the radar. They've announced recently that they're back to seeing double-digit growth, projecting to have strong trends of growth going forward. They made an interesting announcement, I thought, recently that I think is worth sharing, that they announced at their last meeting that they're planning to make a major investment in their port expansions that will not only lead to increasing their capacity by 20%, but two words that were key, I think, in their announcement that I think are important from this work is improving speed and fluidity of the product that's moving to and from the port. So they're clearly focused on more than just the ability to have space for all these goods, but to understand the needs of customers to get those things moving through both in and out of the port. And so as we look at our freight plan and look at how we're planning for investments and seeing what those returns will be, understanding, again, that fluidity, that speed, how do we do as a state, how can we encourage the types of investment as a state beyond the gates of the port that help that achieve those goals, because they understand that these are all interdependent on each other as we look to remain competitive as a state.
Excellent. And next slide, well, all that freight that's flowing, that's demanded by these growing metro areas, that is occurring with this increase in manufacturing and ag production by a growing port, requires more trucks. Within the context of electronic logging devices enforcing hours of service over the past couple of years in new ways and new levels that we've never seen before has put incredible strain on the trucking industry to find parking when they need it, where they need it. We're seeing more and more trucks park on the side of interstates throughout the state and on the side of the road on our state freight network. This is why it rose to the attention of the Georgia Commission for Freight and Logistics. The General Assembly, again, just concluded its report. Of course, truck parking is in the National Freight Strategic Plan as essential for safe and efficient movement of goods. But we need to investigate what are our options. Again, in the partnership frame, it will be difficult for GDOT to solve this problem on our own. But there is likely a catalyzing effect that we can have, both in providing some parking and partnering with private sector to expand options, and using technology deployments to assist with trucks enabled and to find parking within their hours of service windows that works. Very interested to innovate in this space. Wherever we can within the bounds of federal and state law. Just a point of personal privilege here on this, if I might. The work at Federal Highways has been tremendous on truck parking over the last several years, and I encourage those of you to take a look at their website and reach out to the freight operations office there. These are tremendous professionals and who have been devoted to unpacking this issue and trying to help states figure it out. It really, to me, is quite something that really needs our attention. If you think about how much of our freight, how much of our lives depend on the freight that's carried by trucks, anywhere from 75 to 80% of our goods are moved by trucks at some point in their journey. And those truck drivers who carry our economy, having to sleep on the side of the road without proper facilities, deserves deliberate attention and everything we can do to partner with others to get this achieved. So our path forward, what's our resolution? How are we going to bring all this together? Well, we are looking for expert help in this space. But as I mentioned before, a little bit different approach than we might have taken than we've taken before. Building on the business case, looking to assist our businesses. We want and need a business plan for our freight network. So on the next slide, you'll see the reflection back to the SSTP, the State Strategic Transportation Plan, which talks about how we will be investing in our network, foundational investments, which are taking care of our existing transportation system, catalytic investments for strategic expansion and support of economic development, and innovation investments to position us in our network for the future. But really, in the business plan frame, this is about a plan to run the business, meeting our current customer expectations. our customers being shippers and carriers. Catalyzing the investments really is about growing the business. How do we expand our customer base and continue to attract more business to operate and locate here, especially in their logistics-enabled facilities that improve our economy overall and employ Georgians. So we want to understand how our freight infrastructure can grow our business and expand Georgia's customer base. And then lastly, in innovation, it's really in the business frame is research and development. Evaluating and testing out and developing what are some things we should be focusing on as new options to retain and expand the customer base. Innovation in all kinds of ways, not just technology, but how we use data, how we think about the way that we interact with the private sector. In a nutshell, this is what we're looking for. Matt's going to tell you a little bit more specifics that is in our draft scope.
Yeah, so on the next slide, you can see, I mean, really this sort of checklist here is really a synthesis of everything Janine has been talking about, and we've been talking about leading up to here, of everything that goes into the way that we want. When we say comprehensive strategic assessment, it's something that contemplates all of these pieces. So understanding the demand, understanding what the future looks like from freight, and understanding what our infrastructure is capable of and what our infrastructure should be capable of, and what we need to do to invest in those different places, both in financial investments, but also operational and policy considerations. Janine had mentioned truck parking. Those may be policy choices that might be recommendations that we can look through the plan as ways that we can address these, address gaps, address opportunities. And again, so it's about the shipper, it's about the businesses, and it's about their economic benefits. So we're interested in not only what is the return on the investments that the state might make for different scenarios for freight infrastructure investments, but what can those benefits be seen for the actual customers, the shippers, and what can they expect to see? And so as we try to be competitive, how can we use the positive return that we would hope that they would see to attract further investment, to drive decision making in order to lead to better outcomes for them, and in turn better outcomes for the state of Georgia in terms of increased investment and jobs along the way. Safe, efficient, reliable movement of goods. That's everything from operational concerns about conditions of the roadway, grade crossings, what are the impacts of intermodal investments or growth in rail that might lead to block crossings, and where are those opportunities that we may need to make in order to improve safety, improve reliability for users of the network from freight, but also for the users of the roadway that may be impacted by those impacts. What are the technologies, solutions that we may be able to provide or be able to support or catalyze private investment in technology solutions that lead to greater either safety or greater reliability of movement. And then again, it does have to satisfy our federal requirements that we do have. It has to be a plan that is completed from a federal standpoint in time for submission to the USDOT and USDOT approval. And so these are pieces that we're looking at as part of our scope. It's going to include many of the items and requests for expertise and leadership and ideas from, frankly, from you, our consultant community, as you look to put in your proposals for this. We want your reactions and we want your ideas about how the outcomes we're wanting to see can be achieved in an innovative and most effective way. As I said, outcomes, we're interested in the outcomes of these things. And so we're very much looking for potentially a milestones-based type of contract where we would work with you to figure out what are the best ways to package these solutions, how best to stage them, and how best to make sure that we're putting them in a schedule and pricing accordingly to make sure that we're meeting the direction we need to go and ultimately get the outcome that we're looking for as the state of Georgia. We at the same time, and if you want to move to the next slide, we recognize that you guys have key capabilities and expertise to bring to the table, and we want to make sure that we're seeing that from you as you're putting together teams and you're putting together proposals. These are capabilities that we want to see. We're interested in your expertise and your thoughts around these things. That's the reason we wanted to lay out our vision and our thoughts up front here for you, was to see these are the key things that we want the key things we need to make sure that our plan is ultimately delivered in the manner that we need. But we do want to see your strategic thinking. We want to see the ways that you would bring to the table. I do want to bring a point to this last bullet point on the slide. We do expect a robust level of engagement with both the private sector through a freight advisory committee, or maybe even more broadly, specific committee members from private sector interests that cross key industries and are key customers and users and influencers in the state, but also supporting us for the ways we have to talk to executive level up to and including the governor and leaders in the state who have they're key stakeholders as well. The Freight and Logistics Commission from the General Assembly, the General Assembly obviously has key input and insight, and we need to make sure that our plan reflects the things that are coming out of their work. We need to be able to reflect the vision and goals of the governor, as Janine stated from the very beginning. And we also want to make sure that we're able to use the plan to inform that discussion, be able to relay the important key aspects in a way that busy executives can be able to understand and weigh in and provide input on it as well. We do anticipate providing an opportunity within the RFP for value-added services. So there may be things that we have not contemplated in here that you think would be something that would help us meet our goals in a way that we may not have thought of. And so we would encourage that sort of thinking and encourage that sort of bringing to the table of your ideas. That's, again, one of the main reasons we wanted to have this forum, was for us to provide you our vision and sort of our roadmap, but really allow the experts in the community who are going to help us deliver this plan to provide their input on it as well. So if you want to go this last slide that will just sum up, this is, it kind of goes back to what Curtis had talked about at the beginning. We're currently having our industry forum today. My email address is at the bottom of the screen here. We encourage anyone that has questions or comments or things you want to share to send those along to me. We do ask that you provide those to us by April 27th. We are trying to move to have the RFP posted by May 5th. In order to keep on that timeline, we want to make sure that we get your questions and your input sooner rather than later, so it can help us as we finalize the scope, finalize all of the work that we need to do to get that posted. And then have it posted, and a tentative deadline right now would be to have the submittals due by the early June 7th, first week of June, then move through the procurement process, get to NTP with a goal of having FHWA approval on our plan by January of 2023. So that is that's a conclusion of our formal presentation part. I may turn it back to Curtis if he has any additional procurement questions or things like that. I think there may have been a couple questions in the chat box that we can work to answer, but provide a few minutes for some opportunities of questions if you've got something right now. Again, also with my email address down there, if you prefer to send a question separately or would like to provide a comment that way, we're happy to do that as well. We do appreciate all of you who've taken time to join us this morning. This is obviously very important to us, very important to the state of Georgia, and we appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this discussion with us.
Looks like we do have some questions in the chat box.
All right, look right up.
Question from Terrell Taylor about purchasing land for truck parking here. Are there any grants or funding to help in that process? Not that I am aware of. I believe that there is some contemplation of this at the federal level, but nothing approved yet that I'm knowledgeable of. We have in the state of Georgia, from a state funding standpoint, we have a constraint on us in our Constitution. It's called the gratuities clause, and it prohibits state funds from being granted or given directly to private industry. So it does require us to be creative in certain ways, but there are ways to do it. in a partnership sort of way that has been done in the economic development world for years, decades, that we'll be exploring here, but there's no grants right now. Curtis, the next question I think might be a good one for you as a procurement expert.
Okay. I can't see. Okay. Yes, we're going to have the standard 16% DBE goals in our contract. So this RFP will also have the same 16% DBE goal that the department has in all its RFPs and RFQs.
Fantastic. That's the last question that I see there. I guess if folks want to, instead of typing something in, if you wanted to raise your hand, is there a way to do that in Zoom? Okay. Well, I hope this was helpful to you all as you contemplate what we're looking to do here and applicability for your interest in potentially helping us out. I do encourage questions and emails to Matt Markham, and if we can probably put that. Matt, actually, would you put your email in the chat box so that it's easier for folks to,
Yes.
in case they did jot it down. And then I think, let's see, we do have one question just came in. How will this recording be available? Curtis, that's a good one for you, I think.
We're going to look into trying to get it posted to the GDOT website so that you can download it and kind of view it and, you know, go back and look at some. We also, like Tiger, we have a slideshow available as well. So we have a slideshow as well as the recording available on the GDOT website. Hopefully on the planning side. Does that sound doable? Yeah. Okay.
Great. The last thing I'll say as we close out here is we all at GDOT know quite well, at the state of Georgia know quite well, that it is our economy moves and grows as a result of our transportation network. That is both personal travel, cars, automobiles, and truck traffic of all sorts, and that intersect with rail. But that economic connection is most understood, most felt, and most quickly acted on by the private sector when moving their cargo and running their business to move cargo. So if there's ever a time, or if there's ever an application for a business plan for infrastructure, it is for our freight infrastructure. And we're very excited to embark upon this new approach in the coming months and years. So thank you all so much.